Welcome to Season 9 of CX in the Wild, where we venture beyond the ordinary, exploring the untamed edges of experience creation. These are the stories of dreamers and doers, those who craft connections at the crossroads of humanity and innovation. Now, let's join Dennis on the latest journey.
Welcome back to CX in the Wild, episode 2 in New York City, kicking off the world tour. We've been setting up for a while. I'm here with Kate O'Neill. She's brought a book. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
This book is going to simplify the way we communicate about technology, but rather than hear it from me, Kate, why don't you, I always like to start with asking people, tell us who you are and what's keeping you busy these days.
Yeah. Well, I'm Kate O'Neill, as you said, and I am the author of, 6 books. This is my 6th, 4 in business and technology. So 4th one in that space, and it's What Matters Next, a leader's guide to making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast. And why it is that is I find that in my work as a keynote speaker around the human experience of technology, what I find is that audiences that have leaders in them often include people coming up to me after a keynote and saying, I really appreciated the vocabulary you gave us to talk about human experience and how tech changes kind of the impact of things and AI ethics and things like that. But what I'm concerned with is, how do I decide? How do I sort of put these things in place? How do I understand what the ramifications are going to be of, automating my customer support function, or of, putting in a particular kind of procurement function that's AI driven, or whatever the technology is, it's really hard to make those choices. So what we try to do is simplify that, research a lot of different decision-making models, really put together a lot of what I've used in consulting with clients over the years in helping them understand the future as really a continuation of the present, and try to help them think about how they put these things together. So not being so daunted by the future and making better decisions as a result of it.
I can tell this book is amazing already because the continuation of the present, it's so clear and so simple and easy to understand as a human. You get in all these buzzwords, futurists, and all of these things. And certainly people brand themselves with these special words. I use GPT constantly.
Yeah.
And I am amazed at how much weeding out of all these cliches, tech terms, jargon. I mean, it's almost easier just to write it myself because GPT doesn't speak human.
Yeah. You know what's handy? And here's a little tip for your viewers if they don't already do this. I have a text expander shortcut that's called Kate Eyes. Kate Eyes. Just, take a passage that in anything that's written, especially by ChatGPT or Notion AI or whatever, and Kate Eyes it. And I have just a couple of different little quips like, remove all the stuff about these heavy-handed metaphors about the delicate dance of whatever, or all these things, the tapestry of this or whatever. These are way too purple in the prose. I don't want to sound like that. I want to sound like me, and this is what I sound like. And I give it a couple of examples. And it really does a brilliant job of stripping out a lot of that overwrought prose that you're talking about.
What I do is something similar, but I don't give it examples of how I talk. I say, get rid of the jargon.
Yeah.
But I just say, I don't need this. I don't want to sound like a movie trailer in a world where technology is moving fast. Well, this podcast it's all about just being in the wild and just having genuine conversations. I try to capture content that is original, not curated, not found on the internet, created by AI, and having you be here to talk about being human friendly. Can you start by giving us some sort of context of what this all means? Of course, you provide this expertise and you're in a field of business and you're providing value, but there's more to it. And I ask you that because from a global perspective, humanity, human experiences are vastly different all over the world.
Yeah, that's true. So a couple of things. One is that I branded myself years ago around this concept of being a tech humanist. And that I find it was something that resonated when I started using the term, a decade ago, and it's something that resonates even more now. And I think it resonates more now with people because we're experiencing the acceleration of technology and what its impacts are. Everybody kind of, at a gut level can relate to the idea that things just feel like they're moving faster and that decisions feel harder. You reacted really strongly to this notion of the future being a continuation of the present. One of the concepts I introduce in the book is through-line thinking. And so being able to kind of see the continuation of the past providing us hindsight, the present providing us insight, and the future providing us foresight. And being able to really make sense, which is what we do. We make sense, right? Sense making is one of our greatest gifts as humans. And to be able to look at the decisions we're making and the kind of wisdom we're accruing, to be able to say, look, over time, what we need is to be able to make more insights and foresights driven decisions. We need to be able to, inform ourselves and gather up the wisdom of what's on our team and our advisors and use that to cut through some of the jargon and the nonsense that we're going to be tempted to use to solve these problems.
Yeah. What do you think it's most needed in the industry right now?
Yeah, I would think that it's needed in a lot of spaces. Right now, we're talking at the end of the first week of the Trump administration, where we saw a lot of moves toward deregulation, and that's been a really challenging thing for those of us who are analysts and forecasters in the space to make sense of and try to figure out what's this going to mean for this industry or that industry, what's it going to mean for this business or that business. So I found myself doing a lot of media interviews over the last week, talking about the ramifications of deregulation for, finance or for whatever, the different industries. I think what we're seeing is that seems like it's going to be a boon for innovation. And in fact, innovation is going to be, it will seem freer. But I think what we need is for leaders to be thinking about how they're actually putting guidelines and governance inside their own organizations that are going to do just as much, create just as much of a sense of rightness and governance as that would have had from having, an executive order that's overseeing what's appropriate for AI and what's not. But we're leaving it now fully on the shoulders of CEOs and of tech leaders to be able to make these wise decisions. And that's a really big responsibility that I think many don't feel ready for in their heart of hearts, right?
Wow. I was just giving a talk in Berlin, I think, or Frankfurt. And one of the things I spoke about was these standards and these regulations. And what I noticed about it was, so I'm an open-minded guy. I just kind of try to take the situation for what it is. I try not to say one way is right or wrong, but I got to tell you, going for a lot of years and being a marketer, GDPR was kind of a pain in the ass as an American. I'm just this thing, again, feeling like we have to do these different standards. So then I go on a world tour and I go through Europe where GDPR is. And I'm like, the customer experiences are so much better. They're so much better. And here's a perfect example. When you go through Europe and you go to the mall, at every cash register, no one's saying, can I get your phone number and your email? And can you tell me they don't ask you. I go to the gym every country and place I go. In Europe, I was shocked. I went to the gym to get a day pass. I said, hey, can I get a day pass? They're like, yeah, it's this much money. I tapped my card on the machine and they gave me a little key card for the locker. And I was just go, I don't need to fill out a form. In the United States, I have to fill out, or even in Africa, I have to fill out forms that say, and if there's an emergency, here's who we contact. There, they don't try to get your personal information unless you want to give it to them.
Yeah.
So there is an example of where standards create an alignment. Now, I'll tell you this other thing, which is there is a group called the International Customer Experience Institute. Are you familiar with them? Mm-hmm. So they're trying to establish standards around the world. And now some other governments are starting to adopt some of these standards. And here's why. You leave it up to a CEO. You have the same problem with all the companies that you do with your internal organizations, which is customer experience, as an example. It means something to the product teams, something to the customer care teams, something to the marketing teams, and there's no standard. And so without any standard, progress comes to a halt. So to your point, that's my long way of saying, I believe what you're saying, which is even if you have one or two CEOs that is great at this, what you're going to get is a lot of slow progress at scale.
And inconsistent progress, I think, is what we're going to see. We're going to see just some companies having a really good intuition for navigating the complexities of that space of understanding AI ethics and responsible use of technology, privacy, and all the issues you just talked about with the gym swipe and that sort of thing. The fact that you could swipe your phone at the gym and not be worried that you just got opted into a text messaging marketing kind of deal, right? Like, it's nice. It's nice that that's covered. But there are going to be those that understand how to take that all together as one set of practices. And there are going to be those who really don't understand, who think that their path to innovation goes through whatever is the sort of lowest common denominator on the ethical practices and the privacy protections. So we'll see a lot of variance, and we'll see a lot of dark patterns emerge. And I think it's just going to take years more of kind of weeding through all of that now that we're left to sort of fend for local, state, and national standards emerging all over the place that everybody's going to have to kind of figure out their way through. GDPR, as you mentioned, was one of the standards that emerged over the last, decade or more that people kind of went, well, we don't know how to be ready for this when we are trying to be ready for what Americans' practices are. We don't know how to be ready for European practices too, but we have a presence in Europe, so we have to figure this out. That's going to happen all over the place when it comes to AI ethics and regulations, and it already is.
It is, and I will say, in my quest to just share my own wild thoughts, because I see different things, I decided this year I would do my own 2025 trends.
Yeah.
Of like, this is what I think is going to happen. I mean, I could be totally wrong. And if I am, I'm fine with that. I'm writing it for me. If people want to read it, fine. But
I want to read it.
Okay. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
One of the things I talk about there is I can perceive the emergence. And I think you're sort of giving me more richness, more muchness to think about there. Is there's going to be sort of this idea of data sovereignty where whether it's countries or whether it's corporations, you're going to start to see walls go up around the data. And I think people are going to use AI as an excuse. But one of the other things I talk about, and I'm curious because you're much better at this than me, but one of my most engaged posts this year was I just commented and I said, could we stop calling AI and start just saying what it does? Because there's so many versions of it,
Right. It's an umbrella for so many different things.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think the emergence of all these walls around data, first of all, that points to something that I had as a guest on my podcast, the Tech Humanist Show. I had Yanis Varoufakis, who is the former finance minister of Greece, but has also written a book called Techno-Feudalism. And it's this notion that there are data sort of silos that are owned by these incredibly rich, powerful companies, right? Like the trillion-dollar companies own so much data and information about us that they can use to monetize and really manipulate all of the actions and experiences of everyone who's kind of at the mercy of the services that they provide. That is a really tricky situation to navigate. And he makes it very clear what the economic and political and social consequences of that situation are. The second thing that this makes me think about, that your point makes me think about, is just what we've seen in the last few days with the Chinese LLM, the Chinese AI company,
yes.
DeepSeek, right? And we're seeing how an open source approach to sharing results and seeing if you can leapfrog other people's performance, other companies' performance, has led to China actually being able to out-innovate the CHIPS Act and be able to figure out how to get more out of less. And actually, that turns out to be a really good thing when you think about it from a sustainability perspective, an environmental protection perspective. It's something that I bring up a lot in this book, that all of the AI resources that we're investing in are incredibly potent and powerful, and they probably could do a lot of good, but they also are going to be depleting our natural resources so rapidly that we have truly an ethical obligation to think about how do we get the most from the resources that we consume.
We are brother and sister from another mother. One of the things I talk about is sustainability as a core tenet of customer experience everywhere, and not greenwashing. Because you probably know this, a Google search, let's say, takes 1 unit of energy, an AI search takes 4. They estimate that in 2026, just AI queries alone will require the same amount of energy to power the entire country of Japan. That's just the AI searches. And as it grows, so when you think about needing to add a power grid the size of Japan to the world every year for the foreseeable future, your point is very clear. And so without sustainability, so that was my take, but your take on this new Chinese competitiveness, yes, it's a step in the right direction. But here's what I'll say about humans. I find Africa to be the most innovative customer experience culture in the world. And the reason is, you're talking about families that live on like $600 a month for a family, a multiple person family. And you're talking about businesses who the exchange rate to the dollar isn't as strong, so their budgets are thin. So the consumers there are ultra savvy on value, like ultra savvy. And I give you an example. I learned this from a friend of mine. They figured this out. And there was a cocoa company, made powdered cocoa. And they would sell it in bulk. And then what people would do is they would buy it and they would scoop it out and put it into plastic bags and sell it as single servings because that's what people could afford. And they got super big, right? Well, out of nowhere, a competitor saw this experience and just put their cocoa in bouillon cubes. And so it was already diced up into all these servings. And they became the number one almost overnight, because then mothers could buy their children one as a treat. It didn't melt. It could sit in their pocket. They could take it around. So these experiences of innovation, necessity, China's necessity, the restrictions have created innovation that wouldn't otherwise exist. But because of these restrictions, will they share it with the rest of us? Maybe, maybe not. Thank God they're open source for now.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing to, it seems like the entire conversation has to do with these kind of global and cultural contexts that it's just really helpful for people to understand, and leaders in particular who are making big scaling, scoping decisions involving technology really need to be thinking holistically and globally about the impact of their decisions, right? They need to be thinking downstream of these decisions. And that's not to make them seem even more daunting, because obviously that's the entire premise of the book to begin with. Like, it's not so daunting. You need to see it in context. But context is partly seeing it in the context of global and cultural understanding, and what needs there are that are different in one place from another, and what kind of savvy there is, to your point, in one culture from another. So those are all considerations that I think are such a rich part of this decision-making process, and of the wisdom that we need to accrue as leaders and as humans really navigating this space. And really, customer experience, I think, as a discipline, has a much better handle on that than so many of the other adjacent spaces, don't you?
Thank you for asking me that. And I want to ask you this. I want to share in this conversation with you because I Googled and I asked ChatGPT what customer experience is. And GPT doesn't know. And neither does Google, as it turns out. To put it in human-friendly terms, what customer experience is it's the new operating system for the global economy. And I'll explain that to you in that what CX does as a discipline is it turns a hierarchy into a matrix for anything it touches. And at its central theme is empathy and teamwork. So like if a CEO comes to me and says, Dennis, I want to invest in CX. Where should I invest first? How much and where? And to put this in context, Kate, what many people don't know is I have an agency where we do global consulting, and we serve some of the major brands in the world, and we perform extremely well for them in terms of the numbers, the by the book stuff. But when CEOs come to me or anybody says, okay, I believe you, Dennis, you've got me. How much and where? I say, the first place you have to invest doesn't cost anything. It's teamwork. Teamwork is the basis. And that matrix, that shared authority and its role in your business is what creates the integration points for the supply chain, for the telecommunications network, the e-commerce, the financial institutions. Your notion of driving to a destination is not CX. Your top-down leadership is not customer experience.
Yeah. First of all, great answer, great insight. I cannot wait for you to read this book because that discussion toward the end of this book is around the leadership that matters next and has a lot to do with empathy and trust building and team building and all that. So I think you're going to find we're wildly aligned.
That's what I said. Right?
Yeah. The other thing I was going to tell you is just to share an anecdote from, as your viewers may know from the bio that I'm sure you'll share with the show. I was one of the first 100 employees at Netflix, and I got to witness this wonderful, sort of blossoming of that brand and some great early decisions made by those leaders. And I tell some of those stories in this book. But the one story that I really think sort of exemplifies that insight about empathy and teamwork about customer experience is that at one point, and I didn't tell this story in this book, so this is a bonus just for this audience. At one point, we were, this is early on, they're redoing the logo and brand of Netflix. And it was from back in the day, early in the day.
I remember this.
It's like this purple film reel. Do you remember those days with Netflix? And then they adjusted it to something else and something else. What they went to, and they had a company-wide meeting to roll this out, and we all got new business cards and letterhead and everything. And it said Netflix, and there was above the I in Netflix, there was a square dot, like a rounded square dot, but that rounded square was supposed to be like a TV set. And on the back of the business card, it was like gray wavy lines, like static on a TV set.
Okay.
So they're playing into the metaphor of like, you're at home watching movies on a TV. And everybody I knew that worked in the company went wrong. That was absolutely the wrong metaphor to go for. That's not why people are crazy about Netflix. Not crazy about Netflix because you're reminding them of why watching a movie on their home TV is inferior to what they would experience in the movie theater. What they want is that aspirational connection with the movie theater, that notion that through it all, the thing that they're getting is still the same. The content that they're getting is still the same as what they're getting from the movie theater. But you've just reminded them of the environment. So all of the people who worked in the company had a really good handle on the empathy that it took to understand that insight. And we had the teamwork and the understanding, kind of connectedness as a team to really share that insight. But the branding agency that did that work didn't necessarily have that and sort of, flubbed it on that delivery, but they got it on the next go round. What we started doing was all of us started gathering on the sort of the end caps of the cubicle rows in the office, sort of artifacts of what we thought really meant a lot as to the Netflix brand. And it would be things like, popcorn containers from movie theaters, or like a red movie stub, which famously became one of the visual metaphors of Netflix. But it was through that process of really flubbing it, and then the team who really had a handle on the empathy collectively, that the 100 or so of us who really kind of were there at an early day and we really understood what the company was about, we put together these artifacts. And from that, the branding agency was able to come back with the strength of, the red curtain metaphor and the red, ticket stub metaphor and all that kind of stuff. So it's just amazing how I think, even if you think about beyond customer experience as a titled profession in a company, but the notion of having a company that really deeply has in its DNA customer experience, where everybody within the company is so committed to the experience that the customer has, that at that empathy and teamwork level, they can just surface those insights to be able to make better decisions and connect with customers.
100%. Love that. I love the empathy for the experience. And what I would say, because I think I value your thinking, and I would say that customer experience, what I like about it is customer can describe every single person in the world, can explain everyone in the entire world at scale. Mm-hmm. And so the empathy to engage with an audience and grow the audience and all of those pieces, I think in the era of Netflix, it makes so much sense. But what I find interesting about the melange of all of the people in the world is now the formal economies, they scale a certain way. But the shadow economies and the peer-to-peer economies, they exist. They have customer audiences. They defy language barriers. They defy all kinds of different boundaries that we never had before. An easy example of that is digital nomads. They go from country to country to country to country. They serve people from all over the world. They work across teams in different languages. And so there you have an example where I think these, like Netflix, as an example, what I would say is, I'm curious, that team that came up with that experience, was that geo-specific, or was it like, did that work in Bollywood, or did it work in Hong Kong, or did it work in Africa?
Yeah. I mean, that question is a valid question now.
Yeah,
but of course, at the time, we were only a U.S. company. So,
there was no global economy
global
then.
Insight, right? It was,
you weren't even downloading. You weren't even streaming yet. Yeah,
we weren't streaming yet. And I remember we were still struggling to expand into Canada, let alone anywhere beyond the North America. So, yeah, it's so interesting to watch that kind of that kind of growth and expansion happen. But those considerations definitely become so important. And to be able to think about how, you talked about at scale, like experience at scale. I think that piece is so easy to overlook. It's so easy to think about, my anecdotal encounter with this book is that it feels like this in my hand, and that it's just going to be like this for everyone. It's like, well, some people are going to be listening to it on Audible, and some people are going to be reading it on Kindle, and some people are going to be, having a very different, like they're going to read it from this side to this side or whatever. I mean, those kinds of the things that we know because we've studied the experience of being a user or a customer or a patient or a guest or a student or whatever the role that a person is in when they encounter your service or your product. Those kinds of facets of knowledge are the kinds of things that I think it becomes easy to gloss over and forget about and just make sort of broad decisions that don't take those kinds of things into consideration. And what I hope for the readers of this book and the consumers of your podcast and the people who interact with both of our companies, that they walk away a little wiser and a little more savvy about the fact that there are those nuances. And those nuances not only matter to the finesse of the experience and like the ability for someone to feel delight in the experience, but for the alignment of the product or service with the way it actually meets the market and how that comes back and serves you as a business, how that keeps you profitable and effective, and how that actually makes you understand better how you can roll out even more effective versions of what you do.
Because I'm trying to harness my inner Kate. What I love about what you said is we as people, if we try to do business in harmony, it's better than doing business competitively. And I think that being able to speak to each other in a human-centric way, unify these experiences, going back to what you initially said, this hindsight and insight and foresight, being in the present. I think what we feel is, when you said we feel, all of us feel things getting faster, I also feel like not just speed, but our aperture of our minds and our awareness is getting bigger. And sometimes those are very similar.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, now I'm just straight nerding with you.
I love it. Get all philosophical with me. I love it.
So one of the things I did when AI first came out was I made a commitment to myself to talk to AI every day, as much as possible, as like my friend, and just talk to it to see like what is there something in there, like my own Turing test or whatever. Like, and because when I grew up, I used to program. I could program HTML, C++. I started in that. So I was very curious to see like how much can this thing fool me? I finally got on this discussion about beauty and infinity. And actually it started with, I said, do you know the concept of infinity? And the machine said, yes, I do. And I said, what is your definition of infinity? And the machine said, beautiful. And I was like, okay, let's unpack that. And so the machine went on to say, I said, you'll have to explain this in a way that I can understand it, because I think of it as math, or this is not what I expected you to say.
Right.
And the machine said, imagine how you feel when you stand on a beach at sunset and you look out over the ocean and you see the sun and the water and the horizon, and how beautiful that is. And imagine if that horizon extended as far as you could not just see, but as far as you could think. And I was like, wow, that would be pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? And so I get off a little tangent there, but I do think that this idea of moving forward into the future, I think there's still a chance that the technology and the people will find harmony. And I'm glad people like you have devoted so much of your time, energy, resources to guiding people to that. It is sad to, for me personally, this is my podcast, I can say whatever I want, but I get sad when people use technology as weapons, might be a harsh word, but adversarially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's been something that I have wanted to make plain for a while. And it's been a big talking point for me that there's so much potential with AI, for example, and all the technologies, as we said earlier. It's an umbrella, right? There's a lot of different powers underneath of that umbrella. It could do so much for us. And I wrote in the last book, A Future So Bright, there's a section on aligning technology with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how we stand to accelerate every single one of those goals if we use the powers of emerging technology to address them. If we think about, removing plastic from the oceans, or about preventing human trafficking, or about reducing gender gaps, or improving quality education, all of these sustainable development goals are much easier to do with the power of algorithmic optimization and large language models and deep thinking and deep learning. So it's incredible to me that potential exists. And yet what people want to do with it is sell more widgets. And I think I understand why we want to sell more widgets. But what I really hope for people is that they can take a moment to think about what it means to sell those widgets and try to align that meaning with the human experience of consuming the widget or using the widget, so that at least we're a little closer to providing a meaningful experience between what the company exists to do and what the person outside of the company is seeking from the company. And so that at least we're creating a little bit more harmony in that relationship. And that harmony is better than the sort of manipulative, overbearing presence of the techno-feudalism that Yanis Varoufakis writes about, right? We'd much rather have meaning creators in that economy than pure manipulators.
It's true. What advice do you have for us? I would say our hindsight probably isn't going to give us a lot of insight about what's going to happen next with AI in the world, but the present sure is giving us a lot of signals. How should we think about taking this present into the future of just this year?
Yeah. I think the most important lesson, if I were to distill my favorite lesson out of all of the book, it is that there's no such thing as future proof. This term is so silly to me. There's only future ready. You can be more or less ready for the future. And so what it matters that we do is think about what it is we're trying to build, what it is we're trying to create in the world. What would the better future that we want to have look like? And so how could we actually move ourselves one step at a time, one little next move at a time toward that better future? And if that's the way we approach our decision making, we can't help but make it just a little bit better than it otherwise would have been.
That is probably the most insightful, elegant description of advice. Like, I'm about to shed a tear. You just totally enlightened me in that moment, because we talk about it in business all the time. Like, if we don't have a unified goal, if we don't have a North Star, where do we go?
Yeah.
If we somehow all could have a vision of the future we want, I think we're all, even myself, just spending so much time. I think it hit home because I think about the future and what's going to happen all the time. In every country, in every city, in every train ride, in every airplane, I constantly think about the future. I'm one of these people who I live in what's going to happen next. I don't ever think about the future that I want.
That's a really powerful revelation. And I'm really glad you're thinking about it. I will share with your audience that is one of the models that I think is truly the most powerful that comes out of this book. And it's something that I think a lot of foresights analysts and foresight strategists know to do. That's something that I do in my work. But to be able to look ahead and say, in any given, just scenario planning, basically, in any given question you're trying to find the answer to or your approach to be able to say, what does this question sort of imply? How can we unpack this? If you think about the likely outcomes, the ways that something could play out, right? There are many, many, many possible outcomes. And I'm going like this because I'm picturing a graph, right, that goes off in that direction from this moment, right? There's ways that it could go. There's one outcome, one outcome, one outcome. But out of those, there's one outcome that you could probably objectively assess is the most likely to happen, right? And there's one outcome that's probably your most preferred. And that means there's a gap between those. And so it is truly the most important question to ask in any scenario plan is just, how can we close the gap? What can we do to make it more likely that our preferred outcome is going to become more the probable outcome? What could we do tomorrow, today and tomorrow, that could actually make it much more likely that that's going to be where we go?
Kate, we're going to mic drop there. I'm not going to mansplain. I can't say anything smarter than you said. This is the book. and it's on audio. And I really do think, I talked to a lot of people about books. I think this is probably what matters next. Thank you for being on CX in the Wild and coming to the Airbnb and doing this wild impromptu show with me.
Thank you so much, Dennis. What a great time. Thank you.
The journey doesn't end here. Keep exploring the wild world of experience creation with us. Each episode offers a new perspective, a fresh story, and another step into the unknown. Stay curious and keep listening. You never know what you might discover next.